Good morning, Chair. This morning we will hear evidence from Sonia Edwards in relation to her son, Christopher Irwin. Sonia would like me to refer to Christopher by his first name and to refer to her by her first name as well. But before we hear that evidence from Sonia, I would like to point to the fact that today's evidence may in parts be distressing and difficult to listen to, and for some it may not be possible to sit through this session. Anyone in the hearing room is welcome to leave at any point. I would like to remind people that emotional support is available for all those who require it. We have support staff from Hestia, an experienced provider of emotional support, here today and for each day of this hearing. There is a private room downstairs where you can talk to Hestia support staff if you require emotional support at all throughout this hearing. The Hestia support staff are wearing orange-coloured lanyards and scarves, or speak to a member of the inquiry team and we can put you in touch with them. We are wearing purple-coloured lanyards. If you are watching online, information about available emotional support can be found on the Lampard Inquiry website at lampardinquiry.org.uk and under the support tab near the top right-hand corner. We want all those engaging with the inquiry to feel safe and supported. Please can the witness be sworn?
So everything's just there for you to read. You can begin. I, Sonia Edwards, swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Please can you state your full name for the record?
Sonia Vera Edwards.
Sonia, you are Christopher Irwin's mother, and you are here to speak about your experience of Christopher's treatment and care. Christopher died of bronchopneumonia on the 2nd of May 2023 when he was just 34 years old. Is that right?
Yes.
You provided a witness statement dated the 7th of May 2025.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a copy of that witness statement in front of you?
Yes, thank you.
On the last page of that statement, is it right that you made a statement of truth and then signed the witness statement?
Yes.
Have you had an opportunity to read through that statement?
Yes.
Is that document true and accurate to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes.
You have also provided a commemorative account about Christopher's life, and we will come to that at the end of your substantive evidence, and at that point you would like to read that out, and we will then after that show a photograph of Christopher as well. The inquiry is extremely grateful to you for your statement and all of the evidence you're going to give today. Sonia, I want to start by asking about Christopher as a child.
Mm-hmm.
You tell us in your statement that Christopher was a very loving, kind and sensitive child who needed things to be organised and liked to keep himself busy. You also talk about noticing a change in his behaviour and mood when he was about 12 and that raised concerns for you. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
You say that when Christopher was 12, after visiting his best friend in Hong Kong and becoming aware of his best friend's parents' marital issues, his personality seemed to change.
Yes.
Can you say a bit more about the way that he changed at that time?
Yeah. He became quite angry. He was moody, a bit stroppy, and he felt just very deflated. As I've said in the commemorative, it's almost like his bubble had burst. He had had this life that he believed, being an only child, he loved company, and the family that he was with his best friend, was a wonderful, wonderful family that he loved and cherished dearly. And the bubble had burst because it wasn't quite what he witnessed.
You also say that Christopher had signs of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, and bipolar disorder as a child, but that these disorders were undiagnosed. Can you tell us a bit more about what the signs were that that you now consider may have been ADHD or bipolar disorder?
Well, I think it was dyslexic, a bit like myself as well. And I
Yes.
wanted to say that to everyone that's here, that sometimes I may come across as not clear and quite muddled, and it's because of my dyslexia. And I believe Christopher also had that because he was all over the place, a bit like myself sometimes, doesn't concentrate quite as well as he could. And the bipolar, I think, was brought on by maybe him drinking and mixing things. So that may have not actually been a personality trait, as it were. It may have been of a knock-on effect of maybe what he was doing to himself that I didn't know.
And so at this point, when Christopher's in his early teens, we'll come to when he's 17 and talk about drinking and drug taking. Do you recall if either you or Christopher ever discussed the signs that you were concerned about, that he may have an ADHD or dyslexia, with his GP or with his school?
No, I didn't actually, because all those years ago, they're just a little bit different. You know, now we have, more diagnosis and. But then it was like, well, they're just who they are. It's a shame because, of course, becoming that way or being that way and not being the same as everyone else makes you feel a little bit insecure. But yeah.
And we'll come to talk about a period in Christopher's mid-20s when he was diagnosed with depression. Do you know if at that stage or at any time in his life he was ever tested for ADHD or bipolar disorder?
Not to my knowledge.
And insofar as you can answer this, how do you think in hindsight a diagnosis or at the very least testing for these conditions might have helped Christopher manage his mental ill health better?
I think in primary school it would have been an amazing thing and it would have changed everything for his whole life, actually.
You describe a further change in Christopher's personality when he was 17 years old. Can you say a bit more about how Christopher's behaviour changed at that time?
It was when he did work experience, and I then understood after he passed that's when he started drinking and taking alcohol. And he was more than just a bit moody. He was all over the place. His father then moved back from America and he moved in with him. So it's only after he died also that his father has told me his behaviour and how he was. So second-hand, that was my experience.
You've mentioned that at that point he began drinking. In terms of drug taking, I think you say in your statement that it was around that time that he was introduced to cocaine, is that right?
Yeah, that was when he had when he started his work experience. And it was from that day that really his whole life never progressed very much.
And what impact did this change in his behaviour have on your relationship with Christopher?
At that point, from 17 onwards, for then nearly half of his life, our relationship was very poor, purely because when I recognised there was a difference in him, I would question him, and he would say, "Well, Mum, that's why I don't bother coming round, because you're always asking me questions. I'm not into drugs. I'm not into drink. You always look down upon me, and I just feel different. I feel you're different." And he was always cruising for an argument or something to get out that door as quick as possible. A mum sees through and feels everything from their child.
And so would it be fair to say that your sense was, because you were trying to reach out and help him, he's shut down a little bit and distanced himself from you?
Very much so.
As far as you're aware, was there ever any involvement by local child and adolescent mental health services in respect of Christopher's mental ill health?
No.
You explain that when Christopher was in his mid-20s, he was then diagnosed with depression.
Yes.
Was this diagnosis something you knew about at the time or you've become aware of later?
I became aware of it later. It was a lot later that I found this out.
Is it something that you were aware of whilst Christopher was still alive, or you've learnt since his death?
Subsequently, well, as soon as his father brought to my attention of his alcoholism, it was then brought to my attention then.
When was that?
So that would have been just a few years before Christopher died. So all the way through that, our relationship was very volatile because of his change in personality for nearly half of his life. You know, he was not the person he used to be.
You say that you were told later that the depression was partly caused by the inability to sleep due to the addiction to alcohol.
Yes.
How do you consider that Christopher's drug taking and alcohol abuse impacted upon his mental health?
Well, that was the problem completely, because he was the life and soul, the main crutch of the depression and the drug addiction was to try and make himself feel better again, because of course his life was spiralling down. He did a year at university, he didn't follow it through. He couldn't focus on anything. His mind wasn't who he was. And that brought on his depression because he was almost in quicksand all the time.
You understand that Christopher was prescribed antidepressants in his mid-20s. Do you know whether he remained consistently on antidepressants from that point onwards?
From my knowledge, I don't think so, but all I knew was that the medication was prescribed, but if you're drinking and taking drugs as well as antidepressants, they don't work.
What was your understanding, what is your understanding now of the approach that Christopher's GPs were taking to treating his depression?
They weren't looking at it as to do with alcoholism or drug taking. They were looking at it as a different compartment when it's all under the same umbrella in my eyes.
You say in your statement that Christopher would tell the GP he had an alcohol addiction and was depressed, and they would give him a new antidepressant prescription, but that it wasn't holistically dealt with.
Definitely not. It wasn't holistically. It wasn't treated with kindness. It was treated as if he was choosing to take drugs and drink, when that isn't actually the actual case. He couldn't stop doing what he was doing to himself.
And so there was support given by way of medication for the depression, but would it be fair to say that your sense is that it was for him to do the heavy lifting in relation to
Absolutely.
the alcohol addiction and drug taking?
Very much so.
You say in your statement that he was not encouraged or offered help in relation to his addiction by his GP.
No.
Is that something that you ever discussed with Christopher, or something you've learnt since?
No, we discussed, because there were many appointments that I went with Christopher, had to, sitting outside with him, that he was desperate, and he came out many a time crying because he was deflated, because it was like, they're not listening to me. That may have been the depression, that may have also him asking for sleeping tablets, because he couldn't sleep. He felt as if I can just sleep, Mum, I could start feeling a bit stronger. He was running on empty, and so of course when you're running on empty and you're working and you're trying to hold your life together, you drink more, you take more drugs, just to become half the person you used to be. And the more you take, the more you need.
Did he tell the GP about his drinking and drug taking?
Yes.
You've touched on this a little bit, but what is your view as to the appropriateness of prescribing antidepressants to Christopher when he was openly continuing to abuse alcohol and illicit drugs?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
What's your view as to whether he should have been given antidepressants when he was continuing to abuse alcohol and drugs?
Well, I just know that if you are on antidepressants, you shouldn't mix alcohol and drugs with them. But of course, when you are a full addict, the choice of that door's closed. You can't choose, oh, I'm just going to stop drinking today. I'm just going to stop, taking drugs. You can't choose anymore. And I think that's the bit where there's a huge problem there, because they take it as a choice. It's not a choice. And so they're prescribing antidepressants for something they shouldn't be taking, being the antidepressants, on top of the other things they're taking. So with that became hallucinations. That's when he started losing himself more and more.
You say that in the months before he died, Christopher told you that during this period he was off the walls because of the combination of his medication, presumably the antidepressants, cocaine and alcohol use. And you describe an incident he told you about in terms of the impact of this cocktail of alcohol and drugs. Can you say a little bit about this incident he told you about, where he locked himself in his wardrobe?
He locked himself in his wardrobe. And neighbours subsequently told me also he was screaming out the windows just before that incident because he felt there were lots of people in his flat. He was hallucinating, and he was scared. And all the way through, from reading his diaries, which I found after he passed, how scared and how frightened he was and how ashamed he felt, was highlighted all the way through the diaries.
Now, at this point, when he's in his early 30s, are you able to say how much he was drinking?
Well, I can't be specific, but I believe it was a good couple of litres of vodka a day. The reason being is I found some bottles, but the thing was, and the thing that I've now understood more of, is that the more you take, the more you need to give you peace. And all he wanted to do was sleep. And so maybe one bottle used to put him to sleep and he could actually have a few hours sleep. Then 2 bottles. And you don't need many of those bottles.
Given that Christopher was known to have substance misuse problems, do you know whether he was ever given an immediate release or emergency supply of his antidepressant medication?
Not to my knowledge, but I don't believe so, because he lost faith in the doctors completely.
I want to ask you now about 2 incidents in 2021 when Christopher attempted suicide by taking an overdose. Were you aware of these incidents at the time, or did you become aware of them later?
I became aware of them later.
And when was that? How long after these 2 incidents did you find out?
I can't be specific. I believe it was all about the time when his father had told me that Christopher was an alcoholic and a drug addict. It was from then which I then said, okay, what can we do? I looked locally, there was nothing. No one responded to any of my messages wherever I left. Whoever I spoke to said there's a long waiting list. So I paid for private rehabilitation.
And you talk about that private rehabilitation in Luton in your statement.
Yes.
And that was not an effective place.
Completely not.
And that there was no aftercare provided.
No.
So that once he left, there was a cliff edge and a deficit of any support.
Yes, very
thereafter.
much so. Yeah.
You say in your statement that you were not informed about those 2 admissions at the time, but that you found out afterwards, is this right, through social media, because Christopher posted on Facebook showing that he was in hospital and wrote words to the effect of, I'm still here, I've done this to myself.
Yeah, I don't do Facebook or social media, so I found out that secondhand, not from Christopher.
And in terms of the timing of all of this very difficult knowledge that came to you about Christopher and what he was coping with.
Yes.
I think you say in your commemorative statement, which we will come to, that this was about 18 months before his death?
Yes.
Does that sound right?
Yeah, it was a cry for help.
Yes, I understand it. Is that right, that your view is that those 2 incidents of overdose were a cry for help rather than intentional attempts by Christopher to take his own life?
Absolutely.
You say in your statement that Christopher informed the staff that it was a simple blip and told them that he was feeling better. Is that something you understand from Christopher's father or something you discussed with Christopher?
I believe it was something I discussed with Christopher and his father. He was ashamed. The bottom line is you do these things. He did this, he took his overdose when he was low, when he was full of cocaine and drugs and, prescribed drugs and a lot of alcohol. And of course, you go into hospital, they give you some medication, I think it's benzynes or something, to make you stop from having the jitters of being an addict. And of course, you sober up and you think, oh, gosh, that was a bit of a blip. But, it was a cry for help in my eyes.
And you comment in your statement that although there was that medication support when he was in hospital to help manage the symptoms of his alcohol dependency, there was, again, a cliff edge when he left hospital, as far as you were aware.
Yes, as far as I was aware, purely as well because Christopher had tried to take his own life. Christopher was depressed. Of course, he then couldn't sleep more and more. And so I think it really did stop him from getting the help he needed because of his attempted suicides as well. So they couldn't supply sleeping tablets or...
Because of the risk of a further...
overdose.
Overdose.
Yeah.
You explain in your statement that you believe Christopher did have mental health assessments prior to discharge on those 2 previous occasions. Is that something you know to be the case, or is it an assumption you made because of the circumstances?
It's an assumption that I presumed would have happened, but it's not what I know.
Were you, or indeed Christopher's father, contacted around this time, or at any other point, to provide a view about Christopher's behaviour at home, to provide that family input into any assessment that took place?
No one ever called either of us.
Do you think you or Christopher's father should have been contacted?
Very much so. I sent emails to the doctors explaining Christopher's behaviour. I never had one response.
And when you say the doctors at this point, that will be the GP, is that right?
That would be the GP, yes.
And so in terms of your involvement with Christopher's contact with his GP, can you say when that started? Would that have been around the 18-month mark?
Yes.
Once you were aware of these particular,
yes,
quite severe problems that Christopher was experiencing?
Yes. I did go with him once after his friend passed away. I took him there and he went in because he was suffering with being very sad and low. But from that, I don't know what happened there.
And so this is Christopher's best friend from childhood?
Yes.
Who you say was like a brother to Christopher?
Very much so.
Who had considerable physical ill health difficulties?
Yes.
And who died when Christopher would have been in his early 30s?
Yes.
Did Christopher ever speak to you about what happened when he had these overdoses, why it was, or what happened when he attended hospital on either of those occasions?
No, he didn't.
And again, you may not know the answer to this, but do you know whether Christopher was discharged against medical advice on either of those occasions?
I think going back to what you said previously about, it was just a blip.
Yes.
Well, maybe once, the first time may have been a blip. I don't think the second time, but both of them weren't. In my opinion, they were both a cry for help. He was drowning and he needed help and support, and he got neither.
Do you know, and I think from what you've said, the answer's likely to be not, but do you know whether the offer of a voluntary admission to a mental health ward was ever discussed with Christopher?
It was never discussed.
And to be clear, you know of no mental health assessment that actually took place?
Yes, I know of no.
Do you know whether in relation to either of those overdose incidents in 2021, whether there was a plan for Christopher on discharge to get further care or support?
No, nothing.
And do you know whether Christopher's antidepressant medication was reviewed after either of those overdoses?
I don't believe so, but I do also believe that Christopher favoured taking the drink and the alcohol. Not favoured, he didn't have an option, he had to do that. And when he did take it, that's when he hallucinated and couldn't, they said it would help him sleeping. I think that was the main thing as well, yet going back to that. But that made him hallucinate, and it was through that incident of him locking himself in his wardrobe thinking there were people in his flat, was on the back of them changing another antidepressant.
And so at this point, early 2023, we'll come to February in a moment, but at this point, it sounds as though your understanding is that he's not being given access to sleeping medication because of the risk of overdose.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The antidepressants are being effectively neutralised or undermined by the alcohol dependency and other drug taking. And his problems sleeping may have increased the depression that he was experiencing.
Absolutely. Very much so.
I want to ask you now about your concerns regarding February 2023, when Christopher attended Southend Hospital with a ruptured esophagus.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about what had happened in terms of Christopher's physical ill health at that time?
To be honest with you, at that time, I was seeing Christopher, but not as much as I would have liked to.
Yes.
He was starting to alienate himself from his friends. Lots of friends had dropped away. He felt very, very lonely. I would arrange to meet him. He wouldn't show up. I would arrange doctor's appointments. He wouldn't show up. I would be there. Of course, I wasn't allowed to take his appointment. On the back of that, I would always send an email to the doctor explaining the things that were going on, to no avail. No one contacted me ever. Could you repeat your question again, please?
So just in terms of his physical ill health at that time, so he comes into hospital with a ruptured esophagus.
Yes, yeah.
You say in your statement that Christopher's problems with his throat never improved and simply got worse, that he had been missing for a day. You had rung everywhere to find out where he was.
Yes.
He was eventually found in his father's home, in bed, surrounded by his blood, because his esophagus had ruptured from the constant vomiting as a result of his alcoholism.
Yes.
And you express it in these terms that his whole body was closing down.
His whole body was closing down. The skin on the bottom of his feet, because in hospital I was helping him with this, everything about him was changing. He couldn't walk properly initially. He was using a Zimmer frame. He couldn't swallow properly. Of course, he was coming off a very high capacity of drugs and alcohol, so he was very angry because of what was happening to him. I think he thought maybe he'd been a cat with 9 lives and he was only going to get a couple. He'd already had a few, by trying to commit suicide twice, but equally, I will say again, that was a cry for help. He didn't understand what was happening to his body. He was in a terrible, terrible state.
You say that you were told by several nurses that he was incredibly unwell and would be blue-lighted to Chelmsford for surgery.
Yes.
But that this then didn't materialise,
No.
and within a week he was sent home.
Yes, he was put onto a ward. I continually tried to speak to doctors. I took one doctor to one side where Christopher came in on his Zimmer frame a few days after. And I was literally on my hands and knees pleading for him to be sectioned. Christopher wanted to be sectioned also. He couldn't deal with this, but he was very frightened. He was petrified of what was happening to him.
You say that Christopher pleaded to be sectioned as he told them he would only go back to drinking again.
What he was trying to put across was that drinking and drugs wasn't an option. He couldn't not do it. But we were both looked upon as in, well, you're doing this to yourself. When you're a full-blown addict, the doors of choice have all closed. All you can do is keep on doing what you're doing to carry on.
And so would it be fair to say that in the same way as mental health support might look to remove items somebody could ligature with, you needed the mental health support or the drug and alcohol service to remove for Christopher for a long time
Yes.
the alcohol and the drugs that he was causing such damage to himself with.
He needed to be sectioned. He needed to be removed from himself so his choices were taken away so he could have time to find himself again.
Can you recall, you've expressed quite clearly how emphatic you were when you spoke to doctors, down on your hands and knees, begging them to section him. Can you recall how Christopher expressed that to hospital staff, what he said to them?
Well, he continually said, I can't do this on my own. And they would look at him as if, well, just stop. That was more or less it. It was like, well, just you know, you can stop. You know, and I keep on stressing that it's not a choice. He despised himself the way he was. He wanted to be different. He couldn't help himself.
That's the response that Christopher got when he asked for this help. Can you recall what response you got when you were down on your hands and knees, when you were asking doctors to section Christopher?
To be honest, it was almost as if the lights were on and no one was in. It was almost as if Christopher and I were the only one that could see what was happening, and all of them were in the dark. It was just a really weird feeling. It was almost like I was in a dream, and I hit that wall with that dream so many times with every representative for the NHS when we were pleading for help.
Do you know whether Christopher underwent a substantive mental health assessment to consider his potential admission to an inpatient psychiatric or rehabilitation unit during that time?
To my knowledge, nothing, purely because when I went in and he had gone, I questioned the nurse, how could have this happened?
And if a mental health assessment did take place, what is your view as to whether or not Christopher should have been admitted to a psychiatric ward or instead being given greater support in the community?
No, he needed to be sectioned. He needed to be removed away from himself. His doors of choice had all closed. He was on his own. He needed help.
You describe in your statement that someone from Alcoholics Anonymous came to visit Christopher and fell asleep on a chair beside his bed. As far as you're aware, beyond that resource, was there any other consideration or treatment given to him for his addiction whilst he was an inpatient?
There was no other. I did ask, and I did ask the nurse, and she had said that that gentleman had been in to see him.
Do you know if there was any discussion about alcohol detoxification or him attending a unit or something to assist with his alcohol abuse?
Not to my knowledge, but Christopher was gone past that. He was killing himself. To say go and pop in and go and do a course somewhere would not be an option.
Was it your impression that Christopher, at this point of serious physical ill health, was being given integrated care which sought to treat his mental ill health and substance misuse together, or not?
No, there was nothing available.
You explained that when he went into hospital with a ruptured esophagus, his admission and his treatment, or lack of it, was all about repairing his esophagus, which in fact they failed to do anyway, instead of realising that he is there because he was an alcoholic and needed help for that condition above all others.
Yes, it wasn't. It was under the same umbrella. None of it was treated humanely, kindly, compassionately. He was looked down upon. We were both looked down upon, as if, well, you've done this to yourself.
And you expressed the view in your statement that depression, alcohol, suicide and self-harm must be treated together.
Absolutely.
Is it your view that these were being treated separately as isolated problems rather than holistically?
there was no holistic approach to any of his care at all.
And would it be fair to put it in this way, that you consider that by failing to look at Christopher's needs together, hospital staff failed to recognise that Christopher's mental ill health and alcohol addiction were putting him in real danger of death because of the impact they were having on his physical health?
Absolutely. Yeah, he was drowning. He had no help. They were offering no help. It wasn't all joined together at all, looking at it as a big picture. It was more or less patch you up and get you out.
I want to ask some questions now about Christopher's discharge at the end. You say in your statement it's about a week. Is that right, that you understand he was in hospital for?
Yes.
You've touched upon this, but how did you find out that Christopher was going to be discharged?
Well, we didn't know. I literally went there with a bag of clothes, and his bed was empty. And then I started looking for him, and he had gone. He hadn't even picked up the medication from downstairs. He had literally left the hospital, knowing that he wasn't going to get any help. He was deflated. He needed to leave, and it's a bit, Also, they had stopped the drugs they give you to stop having the jitters the night before, and he needed to feed the beast that was living in him.
And so at this point, Christopher's gone home. Did you speak to staff at that point once you realised he was gone?
Yes.
What was the conversation that you had?
I just said, why is he gone? How has he gone? We were hoping for him to be sectioned. And they said, no, he's gone.
Do you know whether, in terms of Christopher's mental ill health or addiction, he was provided with any plan for care or further support when he was discharged from hospital?
From my knowledge, nothing. And he was very deflated when I met up with him. He just felt as if he was abandoned, to be fair.
And do you know whether he was given any information about what to do if he experienced a mental health crisis?
No, I don't believe he was.
You mentioned in your statement that he was never told, if this happens, then call this number.
Gosh, no, because we would have wanted that number.
Do you know whether referrals were made to any community drug or alcohol services or community rehabilitation programme whilst Christopher was in hospital?
Not to my knowledge, but as I said previously, we were desperately trying to find anybody or anything, and in the end that's why I paid for private rehabilitation. That ended up feeling just like a money-making, Christopher, everyone that Christopher met there, all of them died.
In terms of mental health and addiction support, whilst Christopher was in the community, do you know whether he was ever signposted or referred to Open Road or any other community drug or alcohol service?
I don't believe so, but if he had have been, it would be the same as me having cancer and saying, go and see someone and we'll get rid of it. He didn't have a choice. He was killing himself. He could not stop what he was doing.
You say in your statement that after Christopher died, his father found multiple unopened letters from the NHS in his letterbox, which were all medical follow-ups. Are you able to say what these related to? Were they related to mental health or was it physical health?
I don't know. I'm sorry. I can't answer that question.
No, that's no problem at all. What, if any, barriers do you consider Christopher faced in respect of referring himself to community drug and alcohol services?
The barriers are, and this is the bit that it seems, I can see no one else can, is that when you are a full-blown addict, you are killing yourself. Your organs, everything is starting to give up on you. You don't want to die, but you can't stop what you're doing. Addiction is not a choice. It's a road that you've gone down that you hate, but you can't stop.
And of course, by this point, this is a road that Christopher has been on for half his life.
I think it was only in the last few years since his best friend passed that literally the spiral and COVID that literally made him more isolated, and it became stronger and stronger and stronger. I think it had been a crutch for maybe a long while to make him feel more upbeat, to be the Teddy that everyone loved. But of course, when you are ill, you can't choose to be well. And he was very unwell.
You used the term a life of chaos to describe how Christopher was living at that time.
Absolutely.
What, in your view, should have been done to provide effective support to Christopher?
As a mother, if I'd known more, but of course I was continually pushed away because it was almost like my eyes were the only one that could see what was going on. As a mother, you get the lock, stock and stew smoking barrels of your child, which is a privilege because they can take it out on you, and you almost hold on to whatever they give you, the crumbs of life, as it were. Christopher could not stop what he was doing. That's all I can say, really.
And as far as you understand it, the only support he was getting for his mental ill health was through the GP?
Well, I wouldn't say it was help at all.
As far as you're aware, did Christopher ever receive support from a community mental health service?
Not to my knowledge.
Then, following Christopher's admission to hospital in the February 2023, when he is discharged on his own to go home, he returned, you say in your statement, to A&E on 2 further occasions before his death. Is that right?
Yes.
This was with his father on those occasions?
Yes.
Can you say a little bit about what you understand took place on those 2 occasions and why it was he'd gone to A&E?
The reason why he went to A&E, because he was drinking these milky drinks that they gave him, but he was bringing them up and blowing bubbles with his throat, and so he thought, this cannot be right. He was aspirating. He went there frightened. They kept him in once overnight, and they sent him home and said, well, I think they changed the brand. And that was it. He was more or less sent home to die.
And do you know whether on these occasions when he went to the emergency department, whether there was any discussion or assessment of his mental ill health and substance misuse on either of those issues?
No.
I want to turn now to your concerns regarding the lack of engagement from mental health services with you and with Christopher's father. You say throughout his adult life that your relationship with Christopher had been difficult, both as a mother-son relationship and in your working together. Is it right that you tried to help Christopher by employing him in your restaurant? Is that right?
Yes.
Moving forward to this critical period before Christopher's death, in February 2023, what was your relationship with Christopher like at that point?
So at the end, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'll go back just a bit regarding him working for me in a restaurant. When he was working in a restaurant, I never was aware. He was called 2-Pint Ted because he was a very secret drinker. No one knew about the other side. I knew that he was very hyper, but from a very young age, he was also hyper. He always denied drug taking. Can you repeat the last
Of course.
bit, please?
That's extremely helpful. Moving forward to February of 2023, the last 3 months of his life, what was your relationship like with Christopher at that stage?
So when he came out of hospital, when he was in hospital, he was still quite angry with me. He'd been angry with me for a long while because he felt as if I hadn't been there. But I had been in the dark for half of his life, and our relationship was volatile. But as soon as I found out what was really going on, of course, like every mother, you want to be there, you want to save your child. I promised him I would save him. I would have done anything to help him. He knew that at the end, and so for the last few weeks of his life, I got my son back. I really lost him when he was 17, to be fair. I lost him a bit when he was 12 with his sadness from his realisation the family that he had wasn't quite what he wanted. But from 17 also until the end, But I got my boy back. He even said to his mates, I've got my mum. And so I'd lost it. The alcohol and the drug addiction had taken me away from him for half of his life. He was living a life. He spoke to me that, Mum, I've wasted so much time. He could have gone to university. Well, he went to university. The pull back to Southend because of the drugs was too big after his work experience. He had nothing really from it after his work experience. He didn't achieve his goals.
And do you think that pushing you away was sort of an act of self-harm, or him trying to get rid of the support networks that were available to him?
I think that the bit that I keep on going on is that when you are a full-blown addict and you're doing something that you can't stop doing because the feelings inside you are so great, and if you do stop taking them, you feel so low and depressed because alcohol and drug addiction makes you actually low. Your brain is always trying to make yourself feel better. He just wanted help.
You say in your statement, and you've said now, that you feel that you got your friendship back in the last few months of his life.
Mm-hmm.
You refer in your statement to the subject of confidentiality as well.
Yes.
What was your understanding as to whether Christopher consented to share information about his care and treatment with you at the time that he was hospitalised in February 2023?
I don't think lots of us don't understand about the confidentiality scenario. And so I don't think it's about doctors not speaking. I think, you know, when you're out of the medical world and the jargon, you don't know about that. I think Christopher would have been very happy when we went to rehabilitation to sign a declaration that he's happy for us to then be part of his journey, because he couldn't do it on his own. Being a full-blown addict, you need a team of people. You can't carry this tombstone with you.
You say in your statement that it's important for most patients to have control over their own lives, even if they're gravely ill.
Mm-hmm.
But for addicts that have no control over their lives, it effectively blocks any help from relatives to engage with medical services.
Because the bit within you, the addict within you, just needs to feed the addict. The person beneath the addiction is still there, and they want help. The addiction wants to be fed, and so you will do anything and everything to feed that addiction.
You say it seemed like there was no system in place for the hospital staff to take your view into account. What was the response you got from hospital staff when you were raising these concerns in February?
I go back to me being the only one can see and all of them being blind. It was almost like they didn't have the time for that bit because it wasn't part of what they do.
Were you signposted to or told about any kind of complaint system or further step you could take to raise your concerns?
No.
I want to turn now just to ask you about your concerns about the ways in which Christopher's substance misuse issues impacted on his access to mental health care. You say in your statement that addiction is a disease that's looked down upon and stigmatised by people who do not want to understand it, and it's seen in society as a self-inflicted problem. Is that stigmatisation that you describe something you believe is also reflected in the health care that Christopher received?
Very much so.
Do you think that judgment around substance misuse and an expectation that that is a problem for the user to solve impacted on the way in which he was looked at or assessed by clinicians?
Very much so, yes. He was so ashamed of what he was doing to himself, he couldn't stop. You
express in your statement your view that Christopher was treated like a second-class citizen. Can you say a bit more or anything further about why it is you've reached that view, what it was in the way he was treated?
Well, whenever we went anywhere, especially the February admission, it was almost like we were lepers. It's almost they didn't understand, so it wasn't part of their pigeonhole square. We were a square peg in a round hole, and we didn't fit anywhere. So we just felt very lost and abandoned.
Christopher tragically died on the 2nd of May 2023 of bronchopneumonia. I want to turn now to what happened after Christopher died. You explain in your statement that you received a call telling you to go to Christopher's flat. What happened at that stage?
So I wasn't told what had happened, but when I woke up that morning, I felt like a different person. It was almost like part of me wasn't there anymore. I drove, and they had, blocked the road off. And so I wanted to go, and I was like, well, what's happened? It was then I was told that Christopher was dead, and I said, well, I need to see him. And they said, you can't see him, because he had scrambled up the road trying to get help after waking up in the night and bringing up more blood. There was blood all around the walls and his handprints everywhere. He had gone outside to try and get help, and he crawled to his death.
You say that all of the contact that you ever had with anyone relating to Christopher's death from that point onwards was initiated by you.
Absolutely. The day that he died, after they took the barricade off, of course they wouldn't let me see Christopher, I was sobbing, and I just said to the policeman, please can you tell me at least where he was? They pointed, and I sat down and I sobbed. No one came up to me, and every single bit of contact since then I had to go and find. No one ever came to see me.
You explain in your statement that you had some interaction with the coroner. Can you say whether this was through the coroner's officer or directly with the coroner?
It may have been the officer, I can't be specific, but I was so non-accepting, I must be honest, of what had happened, and how could he been left to go home when this could have happened. I was like, what else did he do? An overdose? Did he do this? What happened? Was there more? Because his flat was empty of lots of his personal belongings. I thought, what happened? Only to be told that I wouldn't bother having a more thorough post-mortem because he was an addict and an alcoholic. And so it was almost at the end of his life, he was judged exactly the same, as in, it's not worth it.
And this is in relation to your request for a second post-mortem.
Yes.
The post-mortem report you said had only been sent to Christopher's father. It said he died of bronchopneumonia. And you had inquired about a private post-mortem, but were advised by the coroner's officer or by the coroner's court not to get a second post-mortem. And you felt like you were being told it's not worth looking into this further because he was an alcoholic.
Yeah, I inquired before we actually got the post-mortem because I wanted, the situation happened as well that when somebody dies, you're only allowed to go and see them once in hospital. And on that particular day, I couldn't see him. I was in a very bad place. And I asked if I could go again, and they said you're only allowed once. So I could never see him until after. And then equally, they mucked us around, and so it was weeks before I could actually see him.
You describe your experience that the communication was very poor. There was a lack of empathy, care and consideration in your interactions with the coroner's service. Was that true of your interactions with all of the services after Christopher's death, or were there exceptions?
The police were particularly poor. The coroner was just doing their job, but very poor. Everything. There was not one glimmer of hope with any liaison that gave me any thought of being almost nurtured as I just lost my son, and it was almost as if I then carried my own son's baton of how he felt. I then became the person carrying the baton of an addict.
So there was some liaison with the coroner's court ahead of the post-mortem and then after it. Can I understand there wasn't, in fact, is this right, any inquest hearing? There wasn't any further investigation beyond the post-mortem as far as you're aware?
There wasn't, no.
As far as you're aware, was there ever an investigation by EPUT regarding any care or treatment administered to Christopher?
None.
And as far as you're aware, was there ever any other investigation regarding either his physical or mental health care treatment in those last few months of his life and what followed?
No, there was none.
But can we be clear, he never received treatment from EPUT?
I don't believe he ever received any treatment through, or even contact.
Thank you.
You say in your statement that you feel at no stage was he given support after he died by anybody, and that he was terribly unwell, yet treated as though he was an inconvenience.
Very much so. And I carried the baton after he died.
Did you ever want to submit, or in fact submit, a complaint following his death?
I was more or less, very much so, just shunned away, as if, and also it felt as well that this is how I was led to believe, that if I couldn't get hold of his medical records. It took me nearly a year to get medical records, purely because, one, I wasn't an next of kin on the paperwork, and so sent the documentation. But we both were then trying, and it was almost like they didn't want to give us them. It was almost like a secret that, oh no, we don't want this.
And so the next of kin for Christopher was his father, is that right?
Yes, apparently, yeah.
But having spoken to his father, he had similar issues and difficulties in getting answers.
It was only me that has ever fought this. His dad still works, and so I'm the one that has been trying to get everything sorted, really. But equally, he did the written letter so we could eventually get the medical records, only for them to then be highlighted and a lot been taken out of them. So, and they were quite difficult to read. But it looks like there was no help offered.
Sonia, the final topic I want to come on to is recommendations for change that you make. And then we will turn to your commemorative evidence. Just conscious of the time, and I wonder if now might be a convenient moment for a break. And then we'll resume with recommendations after a 10-minute break.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Sonia, we'll now go through the recommendations, firstly those set out in your witness statements, and I believe you also have some further recommendations, which we will discuss after that. I will ask you if you'd like to say anything further about those recommendations in your witness statement, or how they impacted on or could have changed Christopher's care and treatment. It may be that you feel we've covered them sufficiently already, but I'd like to make sure you have the opportunity to say everything that you'd like to say in respect of your recommendations. Sarah, please, can we have paragraph 55 on the screen? So you should see it come up on the screen in front of you. Your paragraph 55 of your statement at page 15. And you make here at subparagraphs A to D, 4 recommendations in relation to the treatment of alcoholism and addiction. If you just read those through and let me know if there's anything further you'd like to say about those recommendations on the page. Or comment you'd like to make about them. In relation to those recommendations, you talk about addiction as a pandemic and the need to remove shame related to alcoholism and addiction, that there should be a formal mental health diagnosis of addiction, and that it should be the subject of its own department within the medical service. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you want to add in relation to those points?
I think I'm not sure if it includes within that the confidentiality. Open the door for parents, families and friends to help addicts. Don't block the support that needs, I feel, to be. The rehabilitation centres, they need more regulation to support the aftercare programme, and also the confidentiality needs to be addressed there.
Yes, and you say at your 55 subparagraph E, which if we go down to, thank you, Sarah, at the bottom of that page, families need a voice and the subject of confidentiality needs review. Mm-hmm. Within the framework of the hospital, mm-hmm. families and friends and loved ones should be involved from the first admission. Mm-hmm. They should have an option of being informed about everything mm-hmm. and be fully involved in the rehabilitation process. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is paramount to change, especially for addiction where you are at your weakest and alone. Mm-hmm. Does that summarise your position, or is there anything you'd like to add in relation to that?
I think the diagnosis of mental conditions in primary school, ADHD, autism and dyslexia, support for the children and the parents, because in reflection, if Christopher was diagnosed of a condition or conditions in primary school, rather than him feel maybe not as intelligent or any of those things, rather than feel that labels you as not being enough, by getting your diagnosis and understanding who any of these, who you are, you can become very special in your own right. And it's not a negative, it's a positive. So understand that means you could then have the full life that you deserved, rather than just going through the system feeling slightly not quite part of it. The life classes that I also speak about, the primary school, I do understand from here that in the senior schools, they do actually have a life class once a week now, which is very good. But
this is in relation to education around addiction in primary schools, which is that something you would also recommend?
Absolutely, it has to happen in primary schools. Only that I've recently found out that often people that deal in drugs and things, the last couple of years before children actually going up to senior school, they're groomed, especially in the areas where people don't have as much money as well. They see the youngsters as opportunities to literally, and a lot of children are going up to secondary school and already being dealers. So it desperately needs to happen. And of course, how they pay for them to do their job is they're all addicted already. So their life is over. I think treat addiction as an illness, section people who are in immediate harm to themselves, like my son Christopher. Intervention must happen to prevent death. A full-blown addict can't be left to look after themselves. I think I've already said about the rehabilitation centres, more regulation, and educate public sector workers, the NHS and police. Purely the treatment I got was below port. It was cruel and not humane.
Those are some of the further recommendations that you have. Yes. If we can just, Sarah, pull up the final recommendation on page 16 at your paragraph F. Money taken from taxes on alcohol should go back into the problem to help people. Alcohol is glamorised, but it is a killer. There needs to be an understanding of what it does to the body and the brain, and this could be done through public health warnings similar to smoking.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Is there anything you want to add in relation to that recommendation or any other recommendations that we haven't touched on yet?
I think it's the posters up, and it needs to be on television talking about the rewiring of the brain. I've now studied more of what actually happens, of how you then become an addict. If we could educate this within the primary schools and the senior schools, of just understand, we all have a brain, but it seems to be the most least looked into thing. It controls all our lives, but just because we feel and behave a certain way doesn't mean it has to be with us for the rest of our life. We can rewire this the same as alcohol and drugs, rewire it the wrong way. We could actually educate people to be able to work and have the best lives possible, rather than the demise which happened to Christopher.
Thank you, Sonia. I don't have any further questions for you at this stage. Is there anything further that you don't think we've covered that you'd like to raise at this point?
At this moment, no, I don't think so. Thank you.
Chair, do you have any questions?
I don't, thank you, Ms. Lockett. But thank you very much indeed for giving us your evidence.
Thank you.
Sonia, as I said at the beginning, you've prepared a commemorative account about Christopher that you're now going to read. You've also provided a photograph of Christopher that will go up on the screen once you've finished reading the commemorative account. And then, because I've finished asking my questions, and as the chair has no further questions, I'm going to ask that you can finish there, but that you stay in the building so that we can see if there are any other questions for you. If you then aren't required to come back for further questions, you'll be free to go.
Okay.
And so I want to say now how grateful we are to you for the evidence that you've given today. And Chair, if there are no further questions after the commemorative evidence and the break, we'll resume on Monday morning at 10 a.m.
Thank you.
Sonia, whenever you're ready,
Okay.
You've prepared a commemorative account in relation to Christopher.
Okay. Thank you for all coming today. I would like to thank the Lampard Inquiry for enabling this to happen, to give back the voice to those that were silenced. I do hope that the work you are doing will help make the world a more gentler and compassionate place, so fewer families can go through what we have. I am here to talk about my darling boy Christopher. He mattered, he was loved. His life had immense brilliance, value and potential. I feel privileged to be his mother. Christopher was born on the 18th of December 1988 and was 34 years old when he died. He was delivered C-section and was accidentally injured during the operation, suffering a deep cross across his body. He was taken from me for 4 days while I fed other babies on the ward. When he returned to me, he gorged. This remained with him for the rest of his life, really. In a painful parallel, his death was also traumatic. He hemorrhaged at home alone and was found on the street after trying to get help. This is something I found very difficult to reconcile, as it adds the sense that his life was marked both in suffering. Although his life ended in tragedy, it is important that he is not only remembered through his illness or his death, but as a human being he truly was. Christopher had a gargantuan appetite for life. Enough was never quite enough for him. He loved people, company, laughter and connection. He had a personality that filled a room. He was charismatic and had a magnetism that drew people to him. He made friends easily and deeply, and he wanted everyone to feel included. He was a giver by nature. When he was 3 years old, he met his best friend, who he would remain part of his life forever. That friend became seriously ill when he was only 3 and left paralysed and unable to speak. Christopher always understood him. They had an infinity together. They were soulmates. Christopher helped with his personal care. He never left him out. He made sure he was part of everything. He cared for him like a brother. This is the kind of person Christopher was. From childhood, Christopher felt things deeply and struggled with anxiety. His father and I separated when he was very young, and this made his anxiety worse, especially as his father lived abroad most of his life. Well, at least till he was 17. He liked to be with other children and became unhappy if there was not enough to occupy him. He always had an overactive brain and a hyperactive body and did not sleep through the night until he was 7 years old. At the age of 12, he experienced a deep emotional trauma. Someone close to him was living a lie. His bubble was burst, and he became disillusioned. This affected his ability to form close, trusting relationships throughout his life. Christopher's introduction to alcohol and cocaine began when he was a teenager during a period of work experience. This happened without my knowledge at the time, but having read his diaries after his death, he describes the start of his journey into adulthood. He enjoyed the feeling that drugs and alcohol gave him. It gave him more confidence. It helped him to be part of things. He had a love of life and people, and everyone benefited from his generosity. At first, he was not a solitary drinker. He remained the life and soul of the party, still entertaining, still paying, still giving. He grew up to the outside world. He looked successful and confident. He worked in the city. He ran his own business. He appeared capable and sociable. What people did not see was the struggle beneath his appearance. Addiction took hold, but was hidden by laughter, bravado to others. He still looked like the same old Christopher. In reality, it was destroying him. Over time, fair weather friends fell away. Better friends found it painful to be around him because they could see his decline. He became ashamed. He felt deep guilt and stigma about being an addict. He lost his closest friend to the disease and was devastated by that loss, and he began to shut himself away. Addiction opened doors to hell in a person's life. Over time, it rewires the brain. Stopping is no longer possible. It takes you down dangerous roads to just survive his addiction. You see, you would do anything to feed that beast because living with yourself becomes so unbearable. Friendships fall apart. Special friends did not stand a chance. He would have made such a wonderful father. Financially, it took everything and more because addiction had to come first. From the age of 17, when he was first introduced to alcohol and drugs, it began eating his life away. He never grew past that point. During COVID lockdown, Christopher's world became smaller and more isolated. He had a girlfriend, but the relationship ended, and he found himself living alone. The struggle and connection he needed disappeared at the same time of his addiction was tightening its grip. He lost daily contact, he lost routine, he lost the small anchors that kept him going. His loneliness deepened and became more shut away from the world. From his late teens, I could see a change in Christopher's behaviour, which was challenging and irrational. Our relationship was strained and difficult, and I couldn't understand why. I did question whether he was taking drugs, and he constantly denied this by making our relationship worse. 18 months before he died, his father informed me that Christopher was an alcoholic for a lot of his life. He had struggled to hold down work and form close relationships, and the main reason for this was becoming very clear. I knew that something had to be done quickly. I tried and paid for private rehabilitation. There was no help in the NHS. Rehab was ineffective and felt like blame was placed on Christopher rather than the support offered. By then, he was already very unwell. And once back in his own environment, he carried on drinking with no backup from the centre to support him. This was when he lost himself and this is where the loss of himself became more visible. He became more vulnerable and mentally unwell. He was hallucinating and feelings of paranoia. Addiction had taken control of him, and the need to feed it overrode everything else. If it was not fed, there were real physical and psychological consequences. The doors of choice had closed, and all he could do was continue with the behaviour that was killing him. He believed who he had become was who he was. From reading his diaries in rehab after he died, I came to understand how trapped he felt and how much shame and despair he carried about what he was doing. He wrote, "No words could tell of the loneliness and despair I find in the bitter morals of self-pity. Quicksand stretched all around me in all directions. I had met my match. I'd be overturned. Alcohol was my master." He wrote that in rehab. I found out towards the end of Christopher's life that Christopher had attempted suicide a couple of times. In my view, Christopher's suicide attempts were not a wish to die, but a cry for help to a world that was not listening to him. At this time, I was not aware. When Christopher asked, "Why did I not come and see him?" I answered, "No one told me." People were trying to protect each other in a system built on secrecy and fear. Love was present. It just wasn't enough to stop the illness. I loved my son in the only way available for me in an impossible situation. Love did not fail Christopher. His illness did. Alcohol became his way of blocking out the pain and the shame he felt about his actions and numbing his brain. By the time he was seeking help, he was already living with addiction, depression, and physical deterioration. His behaviour was not simply risk-taking or non-compliant, it was an expression of an illness that had taken hold of his life. We live in a modern world full of convenience and products to make our lives easier and more enjoyable. But we have also invented products such as alcohol and drugs. These products are not natural to us. Most people don't get addicted to these man-made stimulants, but a large minority do. Scientists don't know why certain people become addicts and others don't, but they do know that it rewires your brain. Addiction is not a choice for those to become addicted, but for many in society and overwhelming belief, it is a choice. So I'll read that again. Addiction is not a choice for those who become addicted, but for many in society, the overwhelming belief is that it is a choice. This belief fueled the death of my son's end by people that believed he could save himself from his own actions. If he could choose to stop drinking, they believed he had a choice. He didn't. I'll have to read that again as well. This belief fueled the death of my son in the end by people that believed he could save himself from his own actions. if he did choose to stop drinking. They believed he did have a choice. He didn't. Christopher was admitted to hospital in February 23. He was extremely unwell with damaged esophagus from constant vomiting and unable to eat properly. He was deemed too frail to operate on and discharged. He was discharged unable to eat properly, so was given food supplements to form milky drinks to keep him alive. This was a critical moment in his life. He could not swallow safely, and he was physically deteriorating rapidly. 3 months later, he was dead. He was frightened by what was happening to his body and aware that he was losing control. He told me he wanted help and that he did not trust himself to cope alone. Just living had become a full-time job, full-time effort, and he was severely depressed. Christopher and I were both in the view that he needed to be sectioned to save his life. This request was refused. Christopher did not experience his discharge as recovery. He experienced it as abandonment. Despite his physical illness, history of mental addiction, previous suicide attempts, and expressions of despair and loss of control, Christopher was discharged home to live alone. After discharge, he returned twice to A&E. He continued to weaken. Each time, despite his deterioration, the advice was essentially the same: stop drinking and keep taking milky drinks. We trusted the professionals knew best. We did not understand that he was being sent home to manage something he could not manage. Christopher felt there was nowhere to turn. I felt there was nowhere to turn. We were asking for help and repeatedly sent home. I attended appointments with him to the GP to raise concerns, sending emails to no avail. He went to the hospital and was told to eat, to try and manage, try and cope. But by then, he could not help himself. He was losing his ability to care for himself. At the same time, he was losing all hope that anyone could help him. At that point, Christopher believed there was no help available for him and lost hope. Even in the state Christopher was, he wanted to live. Christopher had reached a point where he no longer had real choices. His illness had taken over his ability to decide differently. People sometimes see behaviour and think it's a choice. From the inside, it felt like there were no doors left open. By that stage, he wasn't choosing between good or bad options. He was trying to survive. In the final months of his life, we found our way back to each other, and I had my son again. For that, I will be always grateful. What is hardest to me is not only that Christopher died, but that I lost him long before he died. He lost himself long before his body failed. The person he had been, his brilliance, his warmth, his joy, slowly slipped away. Just to feel even slightly like himself. He tried to get back to the person by taking more drink and drugs, just to feel even slightly like himself. He did not want to die, he wanted to live. Christopher's life and death have shown me easily how a good person can be lost when addiction is misunderstood and treated like a moral failing of illness instead of an illness. His behaviour was read as a choice, when in reality his illness had taken away his ability to choose. He was not refusing help. He was trapped in his condition that controlled him. He wanted to live, but he was being asked to survive alone when he no longer had physical or psychological capacity to do so. What the system met was not an addict or not a non-compliant patient. It met a person who was frightened, physically failing, mentally unwell, and asking for help. It met someone whose illness had taken away his ability to choose differently, but whose desire to live had gone away. But whose desire to live had not gone away. This is why Christopher's case matters. It's not just about one man, it's about what happens when addiction is placed outside the mental health, when loss of control and self-help is not recognised as risk. If the risk is not managed by medical help, the person would quickly come to the point of death itself. You see, you can section a person because of mental illness. They are recognised as ill. Why not addiction? When addiction has taken away the ability to keep themselves safe and they have lost their self-control. I believe the true core of the problem we face, in fact, the majority of society, and this includes everyone from the general population, politicians, the police, and the health service, believe addiction is self-inflicted problem. They believe it's brought on by weak people who should not dabble in things that is obviously bad for them. The stigma of this belief is across the board. Addiction is caused by man-made substances, with a large minority cannot tolerate or control and needs a man-made solution. That solution is to care for them in the same way as any other illness. Currently, this is not being done because the society doesn't view it as an illness. You have heard from me of Christopher's experience when trying to get help he desperately needed. I will now give you an example how different the experience is if you have an illness that is equally deadly but completely accepted by society: cancer. In my experience, when someone has cancer, the NHS can't do more to help them through every stage of the illness. They are not blamed for the illness, but viewed with sympathy, compassion, care, and humility. Both the NHS and cancer charities help them through their journey, and if they die, they do with the family around them in hospice for 24-hour care. Contrast this with Christopher's experience when trying to get help. There was no sympathy, compassion, care, or humility. At every stage towards the end of his life, he was told there was nothing they could do for him, and he would need to help himself to solve his own problems. Unable to help himself, he was cast out of the system and left to die. He did this on the street, trying to help himself. I'm going to read that in turn. In contrast, this with Christopher's life experience when trying to get help. There was no sympathy, compassion, care, or humility. At every stage towards the end of his life, he was told there was nothing they could do for him, and he would need to help himself to solve his own problems. Unable to help himself, he was cast out of the system and left to die. He did this on the street, trying to get help. If anything comes out of this inquiry, I would like to urge anyone with the power to make a real change to trying to understand that addiction is not a choice. People have. Like cancer, it can happen to anyone, and real families are going through this as we speak today. There are millions of people out there, either who are struggling themselves or affected by someone with the addiction. At the invisible end, they fill A&E wards, the homeless hostels and prisons. At the invisible end, they are non-productive or cause pain and suffering for everyone around them, including themselves. Something has to change. Before I go, I would like to share with you a beautiful story about Christopher and his nan. This only happened a couple of weeks ago before he died. Christopher organised a shopping outing with his nan, texting her the night before to be ready by 10. He suggested they go on a bus, buy an outfit and go for lunch and maybe have a sneaky cigarette. He arrived just before 10, joking with his helper. He was taking his nan on a date to Bon Marché and she wouldn't be home for lunch. She recalled to me after he died, he was such a kind, lovely young man. Christopher was always so kind to his nannies. You see, even when he was completely overwhelmed and completely out of control, the real Christopher was still there underneath. His capacity for kindness, care, and connection never disappeared. His greatness still shone through like a diamond in the dark. To me, Christopher will always be my precious work of art. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Sonia. Sarah, please can we have the photograph of Christopher on screen now? Thank you.
I'm very grateful.
Thank you, Sonia. We'll now take that 10-minute break, and if there aren't any questions, thank you so much for your evidence today.